But we'll turn now to our fourth paper of what's been a very fascinating morning. This paper will be about curiosity, and we're joined today for that by Linz Roberts. Please go ahead, Linz, whenever you're ready.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I'm just getting my screens in order here. I've also got a copy of the slides that I'll paste in the chat in case that's helpful for anyone if you prefer to sort of watch them yourself. So this paper is Many Paths, Curiosity as Transformative Process. I also want to thank the conference organizers. It's been a huge pleasure so far being with you all. This is my first time at CAIS, and everything's been so smooth, and it's also a huge pleasure to be at an open conference right now. So I want to acknowledge I'm coming to you as a guest on Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho lands in Colorado in the United States. I'm a researcher practitioner, an assistant professor and librarian for education and ethnic studies at CU Boulder, the University of Colorado Boulder. And today's paper is coming from a critical constructivist perspective. So my lived experiences influence my research and the ways I make sense of the world. I also want to acknowledge this work draws on the work of past generations of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color scholars, as well as European scholars. Because of this research paradigm, this critical constructivist perspective, it's not uncommon to identify positionalities and situate ourselves in relation to the research. So I identify as white, queer, and non-binary. Relevant to the topic of this study, I transferred college credits from a community college and worked as a community college librarian prior to coming to the University of Colorado, since that's relevant to the topic of the study. And finally, I want to acknowledge and thank my colleagues, Professors Megan Welsh and Cynthia Keller, who collaborated with me on gathering data for a larger transfer student project, of which this inquiry is an outgrowth. So a brief overview of what I plan to talk about, sharing the theoretical connections, a bit about some empirical work that we've done, and then some implications that I think are really interesting for practitioners. I'll also ask, how is the sound? Can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. So starting off with some of the literature and the theoretical components, there's three main branches that I'm drawing from here. So we have curiosity as a psychological construct. So curiosity has been studied for decades, but it's still not clearly defined. It's been examined as a personality trait and as a psychological state. There are many scales that have been developed, yet still no consensus about validating those instruments. George Lowenstein, in a 1994 review piece, says, and I think this is great, behaviors under the heading of curiosity are included that are only distantly related to each other. So this is interesting that this is still the case. And then through recent neuroscience studies, we know that curiosity operates through novelty and pleasure and the reward centers of our brains, as well as through doubt and the need to know, which can sometimes be very intense. We know that many non-human animals exhibit curiosity, and scholars from several disciplines do agree that curiosity is linked with learning, especially when learners have choice in how they explore phenomena, or they are aroused by that strong need to know. One of my favorite studies from this branch is by Kang et al. They had folks do brain scans while asking them trivia questions, and people then were brought back a week later to see what they remembered from those trivia questions. And the folks who, from the brain scans, had strong curiosity as well as self-report measures, like they knew a trivia answer on the tip of their tongue, or they were maybe like 60 or 70% certain they knew the correct answer. Those answers came back to them much more strongly and quickly a week later, compared to trivia answers where they either knew that they knew it or they had no idea. So clearly there's this connection between learning and memory and curiosity. And so it's also thought that curiosity helps learners construct mental maps of how the world works, and we could trace that idea all the way back to Piaget. So the second branch is curiosity as it's currently showing up in libraries, museums, and K-12 contexts. So we're seeing the language of curiosity and exploration widely used, especially as they relate to maker spaces and interactive exhibits. And yet some scholars have pointed out, I think about Grande and Shankar here, that this engagement of curiosity aligns with neoliberal or capitalistic branding of curiosity that is connected oftentimes to framing STEM education through economic terms and social mobility. And then the third branch is cultural and contextual manifestation of curiosity. So in contrast to the psychological branch, where there's been a desire to narrow and really focus on curiosity as a construct and sort of pin it down, there's more recent interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work that's actually really opening up curiosity in a much broader way. So in this branch, there's evidence that curiosity is influenced by culture and context. And while we have this sort of sparkly and positive association with it, it's historically been negative in some contexts. So we could think about language such as curiosity killed the cat, or metaphors like Pandora's box, the idea of opening something that can then not be contained and is disruptive. So I'm drawing here with a great appreciation on this recent interdisciplinary edited volume called Curiosity Studies, edited by Perry Zern and Arjun Shankar. And so they're positing that curiosity has this disruptive quality that is not always welcomed by institutions, including institutions of higher education or governments, who may be interested in perpetuating a status quo. So while the term curiosity is rarely used, these authors form a link between curiosity and a critical questioning stance that is core to liberatory, decolonial, justice-oriented, and transformative pedagogies. So these conceive of a curiosity that is collective and communal, not just individual. And we could create some links here between some specific pedagogical approaches, such as culturally sustaining pedagogy, inclusive pedagogy, humanizing pedagogy, as well as specific methods like problem-based learning or inquiry learning or active learning that are all in some ways concerned with these questions to varying degrees. So together, these frameworks are thought to lead towards equity-minded education that values lived experiences and many ways of knowing. And I think this is where I see a connection with the conference theme of Northern Relations and also Dr. Patton's keynote. So together, the tensions in these multiple understandings of curiosity as a construct speak to a larger ideological spectrum, viewing education as a capitalistic endeavor or a liberatory one, and all the tensions in between, right? So I also wanted to give one definition here of transformative learning. This is building on Jack Mesereau's 1991 work on transformative learning theory, and Taylor and Cranton offer this summary. We uncritically assimilate our values, beliefs, and assumptions from our family, community, and culture. When we are able to recognize that these beliefs are oppressive and not in our best interests, we can enter into a transformative learning process. So these are some of the foundations of the work that I'll be talking about next. So I want to share some of the empirical findings that colleagues and I engaged in. So I'll be sharing the results of a study that's based in a United States context at the University of Colorado at Boulder, which is a large public top-tier research university. This study was planned with a critical constructivist epistemology within an asset-based framework and situated within an action research paradigm, since we are practitioners, we're librarians as well as researchers and scholars. And we selected transfer students as an understudied group. Transfer students bring prior life experiences from their past institutions with curiosity as well as with libraries. And this yields some valuable insights and comparisons that single institution students may not always have. Transfer students also represent an equity pathway to higher education for communities who've long been denied access to higher education. And I'll note here that about half of the students we interviewed, 20 of the students we interviewed, were in their first semester since transferring, and we talked to them like maybe 6 or 8 weeks in, and then about half had completed a semester or more at their institution. So we were also able to garner some different perspectives along students' matriculation experience. I'll briefly share some participant demographics. Students self-identified their race and gender through some fill-in-the-blank forms, and then our research team later aggregated these categories. So our student population were predominantly white students, although we did have a range of other race and ethnicities represented, including multiracial students and a couple who did not want to disclose their race. This was a predominantly female sample, and it was important to note that many students held multiple identities simultaneously. So we had a significant number of first-generation college students, immigrant experiences among the sample, as well as students who'd experienced disability or have held that as an identity. And then in terms of majors, we had heavier representation from the sciences, a significant representation of social science majors, and then a much smaller humanities and arts representation. Some of these students did double or triple majors, so those don't add up to the 41 students we talked to. That heavier science representation does align with our statewide demographics in terms of heavier numbers of students transferring into STEM disciplines. So this was our interview prompt. Can you tell us about a time when you were excited about learning something or felt strong curiosity? There were also other places in the interviews where curiosity came up spontaneously. So for this paper and this study, I extracted the excerpts related to curiosity from the overall data set, and we were using deduce for our larger project. And I reviewed these extracts separately through a series of hand coding cycles. All of the observations from coding were then sorted using axial coding into thematic groupings that correspond to the findings section. So overall, our findings were that curiosity was sparked for these transfer students through 4 clusters: curiosity generated by ideas, curiosity through hands-on learning, interpersonal or social curiosity, curiosity that was connected to students' values, as well as overall curiosity as an affective process. So we found that these clusters could overlap, or students might synthesize their learning and their curiosity across these clusters. So you could actually think of these clusters as entry points for curiosity. And these build on Rempel and Dietering's wonderful 2017 article, Sparking Curiosity, Librarians' Role in Encouraging Exploration. So I'll talk a little bit more about each category. So in terms of accessing curiosity through ideas, there were intrinsically interesting ideas, topics such as wildfires, young adult literature, or the history of space exploration that students talked with us about, as well as examples where students found curiosity through synthesizing different ideas. And this student quote is a great example of this. So the student is writing a paper about human beings, the nature of them, if they're good or evil, and was taking another class and mixing ideas across this class. And this example was their favorite paper, that idea of mixing ideas as part of the access and part of the kind of ignition for their curiosity. Okay, hands-on curiosity. We heard from students about things like a visit to special collections in the libraries, volunteering at a diabetes clinic, or working on a marketing internship as their pathway to curiosity. And this great quote from a student talks about they were preparing to go to the Galapagos as a study abroad experience, and preparing for that trip was part of what sparked their curiosity in learning more. And then I love this part at the end of the quote, we learned way more hands-on than we would have in a classroom. So I just really want to emphasize that, these experiences can be very strong for students. From our understanding, it's not that there's students necessarily who could only access curiosity through hands-on learning, but it's what was the spark at this particular moment, and how does that look different across our own life experiences and our own learning experiences. And then this interpersonal or values-driven curiosity. So the interpersonal folks, students talked about learning about people, learning how conditions impact people or the environment, and there was really a relational quality to that type of curiosity. And then for students who connected to values, one student in particular is coming to mind who described hands-on learning, but through a desire to give back. So it was connected to their overall values. And then this quote from a student touches a little more on that idea of values. This is a speech, language, and hearing science student who talked about how much they wanted to incorporate sign language into their professional practice. And they described for us this rift in the community, particularly among the deaf community who felt like speech-language hearing as a profession was wanting to emphasize oral expression over sign language. And the student recognized they really want to shift that in their professional practice. So quotes like this might be precursors to what Perry Zern describes as political or resistant curiosity, where students are starting to recognize and want to transform a status quo as part of a transformative learning experience. And then overall, students often used affective language to talk about their experiences, primarily using positive emotion words like excited or interesting, cool, or fun. Talent for a particular subject was also something that motivated students to engage more deeply, as were, of course, students whose life experiences were connected to the material they were learning. Some also talked about being sparked by a professor's passion, and that enthusiasm, emotion, and affect could then ignite their own curiosity. So there's a final student quote I'll share here. This is a student who wound up majoring in computer science, but they talked about how first they chose architecture, realized they actually didn't like it. They liked the painting and the art part, but not the architecture part. And then trying to code and learning how to do some computer programming, they realized they had this talent, and that sparked interest and further engagement for them. All right, so briefly, some limitations. Participants may have self-selected to join the interviews based on particularly positive or negative library experiences. I don't know about that, though. Some students were surprised when we were interviewing and we shifted to asking questions about libraries. They're like, oh yeah, this is from the libraries. Many seemed motivated by providing feedback on their transition experiences as transfer students and wanting to improve things. That is a possible limitation. There may also have been some priming since the interview location was inside of our academic library buildings, so that could have had an impact. And then I want to note that we can't generalize these findings through this qualitative research, but these findings may be transferable to other contexts. So I want to briefly touch on some implications for practitioners. These ideas connect back to the literature. Some of these ideas are practical and seem obvious or have a long history in our practice, but I think what's interesting is practitioners have not always thought of these methods through the lens of curiosity and transformative learning. Something that was really powerful, maybe not surprising, but a bit sad for me, was that none of the students interviewed associated a library worker with their curiosity. So library workers can talk with students about curiosity, about its many types, how it connects with stages of the research process, such as Colto's information search process model that includes affective components. And we can affirm that there are many types of curiosity, that there's not a hierarchy of curiosity, there are multiple paths. We can use questions to stimulate curiosity. Great example of an engineering course where this was explored that led not only to students promoting curiosity, critical thinking, and teamwork, but also both convergent and divergent thinking. Shankar argues that libraries can be a space that helps people synthesize their own questions with related phenomena. There's also examples of storytelling, such as using bad science that illustrate mistakes and failures as entry points to curiosity related to ideas. And finally, libraries are often spaces for exhibits and speaker series, but we don't always think about these as they relate to curiosity and especially transformative learning. In terms of hands-on opportunities, I'm really thinking of this question: where are opportunities for embodiment or sensory connections through objects, spaces, or active participation that could then be pathways to curiosity? And there's some, commonly used strategies through primary source materials, through active participation, engaging students in preservation, collection development, or description, or transcription of materials. We've also had a great time with our transfer students doing behind-the-scenes tours or wandering the stacks as a process of curiosity and framing it as such. And then finally, for the interpersonal or values pathways, Rimple and Dietering aimed to engage social curiosity. They embedded some stories about their campus researchers within a campus map to connect this sort of relational and spatial idea to generate students' interest in the lives and work of scholars as a starting point for research. Science Cafe would be another model for dialogue, bringing experts and non-experts together. And then at my own institution, we've explored the living library, or what's sometimes called the human library, as a method. And then I've got just 2 final slides here. I want to make this point that I think is really powerful, that we have all of these messages about curiosity, and I see that educators, including academic library workers, have opportunities to reconsider how curiosity is framed, as well as the pathways that students described. So while curiosity evokes connotations of what and how inquiry should look, such as this photograph of a pro-science protest, this type of this message of curiosity is often viewed positively by libraries and education, cultural heritage institutions. Funding and grants are often tied to these messages of curiosity as innovation, exploration, associated with science, objectivity, and so forth. And yet what I think is really often overlooked is this larger scale where collective and social curiosity may lead to a resistant curiosity that Perry Zern suggests is the needed for our societal problems and to address historic and ongoing oppression. So I would say that together with our learners, library workers and educators can question and complicate and expand these messages about curiosity and consider how we're supporting all of these types of curiosity. So with that, I will invite questions and put this link again to the slides into the chat. So thank you very much.